A millionaire man invited his ex-girlfriend to his wedding, hoping to rub his success in her face, only for her to show up with his triplets. Welcome to Stories with William channel. Before we dive in, make yourself comfortable and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories coming. Let's begin. Edward Langston was the epitome of a self-made success story. Raised in a blue-collar neighborhood, he spent his childhood dreaming of escaping the hardships of his upbringing. Edward's early life was marked by struggles. His father toiled in a factory while his mother juggled several part-time jobs to make ends meet. Witnessing their sacrifices fueled Edward's determination to create a better life. He vowed to rise above his circumstances, channeling his ambition into academic excellence. His efforts earned him a scholarship to a prestigious university, where his intelligence and relentless work ethics set him apart. It was during his university years, amid the chaos of deadlines and aspirations, that Edward met Clara Matthews. Clara was Edward's opposite in many ways. While he was a pragmatist laser focused on his goals, Clara was a dreamer and an artist who found beauty in life. His imperfections they met by chance at an art exhibit on campus, where Edward was captivated by Clara's work. Her paintings told stories of hope, resilience, and the human spirit, qualities Edward admired but didn't believe he possessed. The two quickly fell in love, their contrasting personalities creating a powerful connection. Clara became Edward's source of comfort and perspective during his demanding academic journey. For Clara, Edward was a steady presence, encouraging her to pursue her creative dreams. As Edward transitioned from student life to the professional world, their bond grew stronger. Clara was his emotional and financial rock during the early days of his startup venture, a company that aimed to revolutionize e-commerce. She believed in Edward's vision, often taking on extra shifts at her part-time job to support his dream. Their modest apartment doubled as a home and workspace filled with Edward's whiteboard sketches and Clara's artwork. Despite their chaotic life, they shared a common goal, building a future together that blended their ambitions. But as Edward's business gained traction, the cracks in their relationship deepened. His growing success demanded more of his time, and his focus shifted entirely to his work. Networking events, investor meetings, and long nights away left Clara feeling increasingly neglected. She yearned for the Edward who once shared her dreams and valued their connection. Edward, on the other hand, began to view their relationship as an obstacle, misunderstanding Clara's concerns as a lack of support. He grew resentful of her attempts to reconnect. Arguments became a regular occurrence, chipping away at the love they once shared. The breaking point came during an explosive fight about their future. Clara accused Edward of prioritizing his ambition over their relationship, while Edward defensively claimed that Clara was holding him back. The harsh exchange ended with Clara walking away, heartbroken, and Edward throwing himself deeper into his work, convinced that success would fill the void she left behind. Edward's gamble paid off, and in a few short years, his startup became a household name, and he skyrocketed to fame. And Fortune magazine covers celebrated his achievements, and his life became a curated image of luxury and success, surrounded by glamorous acquaintances and indulging in a lifestyle of extravagance. Edward convinced himself he had moved on. Clara became nothing more than a distant memory, a chapter he chose to forget. Meanwhile, Clara's life took an unexpected turn. Not long after their breakup, she discovered she was pregnant. The revelation was bittersweet. Overjoyed yet daunted by the challenges ahead, Clara decided to face motherhood alone, knowing Edward wouldn't sacrifice his ambitions for a family. Drawing on her resilience and independence, she embraced the role of a single mother, determined to create a loving home for her children. When Clara gave birth to triplets, her life transformed irrevocably. Her days became a blur of diapers, feedings, and sleepless nights. Yet amid the chaos she discovered a deep sense of purpose. Raising 3 children alone was an arduous journey, one that demanded she juggle multiple jobs and put her dreams on hold to provide for her family despite the hardships. Clara refused to let resentment take root. Instead, she poured her emotions into her art-crafting pieces that resonated deeply with others and earned her modest acclaim in the local art scene. Her children thrived in a home filled with love, never dwelling on the absence of the man who had walked away from their lives. Clara often reminded herself she didn't need Edward, and for the most part, she believed her world revolved around her children, and their happiness was all that mattered. Years later, a gilded envelope arrived at Clara's door. Its elegant script invited her to the wedding of Edward Langston and Veronica. St. James, her hands trembled as she read the words, a storm of emotions flooding her heart. Long-buried memories surged to the surface, stirring feelings of sorrow and anger. Edward's invitation was no olive branch. It was a calculated gesture designed to showcase his success and remind her of the life she had supposedly missed out on. Clara wrestled with the decision to attend, knowing it would dredge up painful emotions. But as she looked at her children, now flourishing and full of life, her resolve grew stronger. Edward deserved to face the truth about the life he had left behind. This invitation marked the start of a journey Clara never anticipated. She wasn't the same woman Edward had abandoned. She had become resilient, wise, and ready to confront the man who had once broken her heart. What Edward saw as a triumphant display of his achievements would instead challenge the carefully curated image he had built. His wedding day, meant to be a crowning moment, was about to become a reckoning that would force him to confront his past and its consequences. Edward's wedding to Veronica St. James was poised to be the event of the season, with an exclusive guest list that included tech mobiles, celebrities, and political figures. The celebration was set at a lavish estate, adorned with imported flowers, crystal chandeliers, and opulent decor. Every detail, meticulous, lay arranged to reflect Edward's climb to the pinnacle of success. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration of his triumph. Among the many invitations was one addressed to Clara Matthews in bold, elegant lettering. Edward had hesitated before adding her name, but ultimately decided that her presence would be the perfect symbol of his victory. He pictured her arriving at the estate, understated and out of place, her expression betraying regret as she took into the grandeur she could have been part of. But Edward underestimated Clara. The invitation disrupted the quiet rhythm of her life, and as she read its contents, emotions she had carefully tucked away came rushing back. Memories of love, heartbreak, and the years of perseverance that followed resurfaced. Clara quickly saw through Edward's gesture. It wasn't about closure, it was a calculated power play. Instead of succumbing to his narrative, Clara resolved to attend, not as a defeated figure from his past, but as a testament to her strength and resilience. She would remind Edward that her life, though different from his, was no less meaningful. What Edward intended as a moment of superiority would become a confrontation. He hadn't anticipated setting the stage for truths he couldn't ignore. For a fleeting moment, Clara considered discarding the invitation, throwing it away, and moving on with her life as if it never existed. But then she thought about her children. They had grown up without their father, and while Clara had worked hard to protect them from the bitterness of her past, she couldn't ignore the questions. Had they deserved the truth, even if facing it meant confronting the man who had caused her so much heartache in the days that followed. Clara wrestled with her emotions, anger, sorrow, and curiosity, each taking their turn. Part of her wanted to stay away to keep old wounds from reopening. Yet another part, the part that had fought to give her children a good life, longed to face Edward. She imagined walking into his wedding not as the defeated woman he might expect, but as a proud, resilient mother who had built a beautiful life for herself and her children. Clara didn't crave revenge, but she did want Edward to see the truth. He had moved on. But so had she, and her story was one of strength and perseverance. When Clara finally decided to attend the way she knew she wouldn't go alone, her 5-year-old triplets her world, and her pride would be by her side. Their presence would say more than words ever could. Clara had no intention of causing a scene, but she also refused to hide her children, had every right to meet their father, no matter how unexpected the circumstances in the weeks leading. Up to the wedding, Clara prepared with a mix of anxiety and resolve. She chose a dress that was elegant, yet understated, a reflection of her quiet confidence. She explained the situation to her children in simple terms, telling them they were going to meet an old friend. The triplets, thrilled at the idea of a grand party, remained blissfully unaware of the deeper significance. Meanwhile, Edward remained equally oblivious. Preoccupied with the meticulous details of the event, he envisioned a flawless celebration. Showcasing his success, his fiancée Veronica was just as invested in the grandeur of the day, eager to cement her place as the wife of one of the country's most influential men. To Edward, Clara belonged to a past he had long since discarded, a distant chapter overshadowed by his achievements. Her presence at the wedding would only underscore how far he had come. On the wedding morning, the estate glittered under a bright sun. The grounds were a spectacle of luxury, sprawling gardens adorned with exotic looms glittering. Chandeliers suspended in grand tents and tables dressed with the finest china, and silver guests arrived and drove, stepping out of their sleek cars into a world of curated opulence. Edward, preparing for the ceremony, allowed his thoughts to drift briefly to Clara, imagining her awe as she stepped into this display of his success. He was sure of his dominance until she arrived. When Clara walked into the hall, time seemed to stop. Her simple yet elegant dress and her air of quiet confidence immediately drew attention. But it was the 3 children by her side who captivated the room with their radiant smiles and striking resemblance to Edward. They held Clara's hands as they entered, creating a scene that silenced conversations and sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Who were these children, and why did they look so much like the groom? Edward's carefully crafted world began to crack. The sight of Clara with 3 children, a mirror of himself and their features, was something he had never anticipated. Clara's presence changed the entire dynamic. She wasn't there to fawn over his achievements or mourn lost opportunities. She was there to reveal a story Edward had not accounted for, one that would reshape the course of the day and his life. On Edward Langston's wedding day, the grand estate stood as a testament to his wealth and power. Every detail, from the ported flowers to the live orchestra, exuded opulence. It was the perfect setting for the union of Edward and Veronica St. James, a couple whose unions symbolized success and status. Yet amidst the glittering chandeliers and lavish displays, the arrival of Clara and her children turned the carefully orchestrated event into something Edward could never have foreseen. Inside the bridal suite, Veronica exuded elegance and poise. Her custom-designed gown, embellished with pearls and diamonds, reflected her refined taste and commanded attention. As the daughter of a powerful real estate tycoon, she had been steeped in luxury and privilege from birth, making her an ideal match for Edward in his quest for influence and prestige. She based in the grandeur of the occasion, savoring the adoration and the promise of becoming the wife of one of the nation's most accomplished men. While her bridal party fussed over the finishing details, Veronica gazed at her reflection with a satisfied smile, confident that the day would be unforgettable. Meanwhile, Edward stood alone in a private room, methodically adjusting his tie in preparation for the pivotal moment ahead. Pride swelled within him as he reflected on his journey. His achievements and the legacy he was about to solidify. This day was not just a celebration of love, it was a statement of triumph. Pausing to assess his polished image in the mirror, Edward allowed himself a fleeting moment of self-congratulation. His meticulously planned life was unfolding exactly as he had envisioned. Briefly, his thoughts drifted to Clara Matthews and the life he might have led had he chosen differently. Inviting Clara had been a calculated move, one he expected would make little impact. He pictured her arriving quietly, offering a polite smile, before blending into the crowd, barely a ripple in his grand event. Edward had no inkling of how wrong he would be. Clara, on the other hand, approached the day with both trepidation and resolve. She had carefully dressed her triplets in coordinated formal attire that harmonized with her own sophisticated ensemble, ensuring every detail was perfect. Her children, filled with excitement over the big event, were blissfully unaware of the emotional stakes. As Clara drove toward the estate, she reflected on the person she had become. Gone was the shy, idealistic young woman who had once dreamed of a future. With Edward, she was now a mother, an artist, and a resilient woman who had built a fulfilling life on her own terms. Her heart raised as the estate's grandeur came into view, a stark reminder of Edward's intent to showcase his success. But Clara had not come to feel diminished. She had come to assert the truth Edward had long ignored. The moment Clara arrived was nothing short of a spectacle stepping out of her mind. His car, with her 3 children by her side, she immediately drew the attention of onlookers. Heads turned, and whispers rippled through the crowd as they made their way toward the venue. It wasn't Clara's presence alone that caused the stir. It was the striking resemblance her children bore to Edward, with their piercing eyes, sharp features, and even familiar gestures. The triplets were an undeniable reflection of the groom. It was as though the past Edward had buried had suddenly resurfaced unedited and impossible to dismiss inside the venue. The atmosphere shifted as word of Clara's arrival spread like wildfire. Guests speculated about her identity, her history with Edward, and most of all the startling presence of her children when Clara entered the grand hall. All eyes locked on her. The orchestra faltered, the music momentarily slipping as even the musicians turned to see what had caused the commotion. Clara, undaunted by the attention, carried herself with quiet dignity, her children flanking her like a protective shield. The triplets, unaware of the tension, were captivated by the lavish decorations, their excitement of vivid contrast to the unease in the room. From his place at the front, Edward froze as his eyes landed on Clara. For a moment he didn't recognize her. She radiated strength and confidence, so different from the woman he remembered. But it wasn't just Clara who held his gaze. His attention shifted to the 3 children by her side, and a jolt of recognition stopped him cold. Their resemblance to him was indisputable as realization washed over him. Edward's carefully curated composure crumbled. These weren't just Clara's children, they were his. The room seemed to hold its breath as a subtle shift in energy overtook the space. Veronica, engaged in light conversation with the guests, caught sight of Edward's expression and instinctively followed his gaze. Her smile faltered, freezing in place. As her eyes locked on Clara and the triplets, a flicker of confusion and disbelief crossed her face before she turned to Edward, silently demanding an explanation. For the first time in years, Edward found himself speechless. Clara moved forward with measured steps, her pace deliberate. A ripple of whispers spread among the guests, their curiosity too great to suppress. Who is this woman, and what was her connection to Edward? As Clara and her children reached the center of the room, she stopped and fixed her gaze on Edward. For a moment, the silence was palpable, weighed down by the past unspoken truths and the years that had separated them. Edward, trapped between shock and shame, struggled to comprehend the scene before him. Clara, steady and resolute, finally broke the silence. "Hello, Edward," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's been a long time." The triplets, sensing the tension, clung to Claire's hands, their wide eyes darting around the grand room. Veronica, visibly unnerved, stepped closer to Edward and whispered something under her breath. Her words barely registered. Edward's focus was locked entirely on Clara and the children. The room seemed to contract as Edward grappled with the magnitude of the moment. This was no mere interruption to his wedding. It was a reckoning with a truth he had long avoided. Clara's arrival and the presence of her children shattered the carefully curated image. Edward had built the day he had envisioned as the pinnacle of his achievements was unraveling before him. The once lively hall fell into an eerie silence. The guests, frozen as they watched the drama unfold. Clara Matthews stood tall, her 3 children by her side, facing Edward Langston. The whispers that began as faint murmurs now spread like wildfire, charged with the undeniable resemblance between the triplets, and Edward, once so composed, now stood motionless, his face betraying a mix of confusion and unease. It was as though the very foundation of his world had shifted, leaving him grasping for stability. The realization struck with the force of a tidal wave. These children were his. Veronica's perfectly polished demeanor cracked as she turned to Edward. Her expression a blend of suspicion and alarm, her voice sharp and low pierced. "Attention, Edward," she demanded, pulling him aside. "Who is she, and those children, who are they?" Edward had no answers, his mind too overwhelmed to form coherent thoughts. How could he explain something he was only beginning to comprehend himself? Clara, sensing the weight of the moment, took control. She hadn't come to cause a scene, but she wouldn't let Edward evade the truth either. Her voice carried across the room, calm yet unyielding. "These are your children, Edward," she declared, her words deliberate. "Meet James, Amelia, and Theo." Each name was spoken with pride, a testament to their rightful place in the world. The triplets gazed up at Edward, their innocent eyes full of curiosity, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. The revelation rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Gasps punctuated the silence, and murmurs of disbelief spread among the guests. "His children," someone whispered, their voice filled with incredulity. "Did you know he had kids?" Another guest murmured, leaning into their companion. The room buzzed with speculation, but at the center of it all, Edward stood, frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling under the weight of Clara's truth. The revelation that Edward the groom had 3 children, no one had known about since shockwaves through the room, shattering the carefully curated image of the man everyone thought they knew. His chest tightened as he stared at the 3 small faces gazing back at him. There was no denying it. They were his. James bore his sharp jawline. Amelia had his piercing eyes, and Theo mirrored his determined expression. It was as if fate had etched pieces of Edward into each of them, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind. Yet, despite the undeniable truth, Edward struggled to accept it. His life had been a series of meticulously planned decisions, all leading to his success. The sudden existence of these children, hidden from him for so long, threatened to unravel everything. What do you mean?" he stammered, his voice unsteady. This can't be real." Turning to Clara, he was a picture of disbelief and frustration. "Why didn't you tell me? Why now?" His defensive tone only fueled Clara's resolve. She had anticipated his reaction and prepared herself for it. Taking a steadying breath, she met his gaze, her voice firm yet tinged with emotion. "I didn't tell you because you left, Edward," Clara replied. "You made it clear that your ambitions were more important than anything else. I found out I was pregnant after we broke up, but by then you were already gone, chasing your dreams." Her words hung heavily in the air, a stark reminder of the choices Edward had made and the consequences he had ignored. Clara's voice softened slightly as she continued, "I raised them on my own, and I've never regretted it, but they deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them." Edward's mind raised as he processed her words. Guilt gripped him. sharp and unyielding as he realized what he had missed. Milestones gone, moments forever lost. Even as regret overwhelmed him, anger bubbled to the surface. Anger at Clara for withholding the truth, anger at himself for his choices, and anger at the situation unraveling so publicly. Meanwhile, Veronica stood frozen, her disbelief giving way to fury. She turned to Edward, her voice sharp and demanding. "Is this true? Are they really your children?" Edward, caught between the weight of his past and the chaos of the present, could only nod the unspoken. Admission was etched on his face, Veronica's expression contorted with rage and betrayal. This was supposed to be her day, her moment, and now was overshadowed by a revelation she hadn't seen coming. The guests, now captivated by the unfolding drama, exchanged whispers or simply stared, unable to look away. Edward, overwhelmed by the mounting pressure, felt as if the walls were closing in around him. His perfect day had unraveled into a nightmare, and there was no escaping the truth Clara had brought with her. Clara, however, remained composed. She hadn't come to humiliate Edward or ruin his wedding. Her goal was simple: to ensure her children knew their father, and that Edward faced the truth of his past. As she looked at him, now she saw a man no longer exuding confidence and ambition, but one who was vulnerable, exposed, and struggling to confront the reality he had long avoided. The tension in the room was finally broken by the quiet voices of the triplets, tugging gently at Clara's hands. James spoke softly, his innocent question piercing the silence. "Mommy, is he our daddy?" The simplicity of the question shattered the last of Edward's defenses. He looked at the children, their wide, hopeful eyes a stark reminder of the love and innocence he had forsaken in his relentless pursuit of success. In that moment, the weight of his choices hit him with full force, and Edward realized that no amount of ambition or achievement could ever replace the family he had lost. The grand hall was cloaked in an uneasy silence, the tension in the air almost tangible, as Edward Langston confronted the truth he had avoided for so long. Clara's words lingered in his mind, each one tearing apart the carefully crafted illusion of his perfect life. Standing beside her were James, Amelia, and Theo, his triplets, whose innocent gazes starkly contrasted with the turmoil within him. Around them, and guests shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to stay or discreetly leave what had begun, as a celebration of Edward's success and love had spiraled into an unexpected and raw confrontation. Veronica St. James, Edward's fiancée, was the first to break the silence. Her face, a mix of anger, confusion, and humiliation, turned toward Edward as her voice rang through the hall. "Is this some sort of cruel joke?" she demanded, her tone cutting. "Edward, tell me this is untrue." But Edward's stricken expression told her everything she feared. Words eluded him as his throat went dry and his thoughts churned. Veronica's composed exterior began to crack, her dream wedding unraveling in front of hundreds of witnesses still in shock. Edward tried to gather himself, instinctively wanting to deny, deflect, and salvage what remained of his image. Yet as his eyes met the three small faces watching him, he knew there was no escape. The truth was undeniable. They were his children, and the secret was out. Taking a shaky breath, Edward turned to Clara, his voice heavy with guilt and frustration. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his words edged with accusation. Clara, prepared for this moment, stood firm. "You left Edward," she said, her voice steady. "You made it clear that your dreams mattered more than anything else. By the time I learned I was pregnant, you were already gone, building your empire, chasing success. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you wanted to know." Her tone softened as she glanced at the children. "But they deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them. That's why I'm here." Veronica's patience snapped. "So you've kept this from him for years, and now you show up on our wedding day to drop this bomb." She spat, her words dripping with venom. Clara met Veronica's fury with calm resolve. "This isn't about you," she replied, her voice unwavering. "This is about my children knowing the truth. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding. I came because—" This needed to be said, no matter how inconvenient it is. The guests, murmuring among themselves, openly speculated about the drama unfolding before them. Some admired Clara's courage, while others cast out on Edward's character. The ripple effect of the revelation was undeniable. Spreading unease through the room, Edward's colleagues exchanged subtle glances. Their opinions of him clearly shifting. Veronica's friends whispered in sympathetic tones, rallying around the humiliated bride. To be amid the escalating tension, Edward knew he had to act. The weight of the moment bore down on him, and the judgment from the crowd was suffocating. Stepping forward, he looked directly at Clara and the children. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice quieter, almost pleading. Clara nodded understanding. She crouched down to her children and smiled reassuringly. "Why don't you three sit over there for a bit?" she suggested, motioning to a quieter corner. The triplets obeyed, holding each other's hands tightly. Edward led Clara to a side room away from the prying eyes of the guests. Veronica hesitated briefly before following her emotions, a turbulent mix of anger and curiosity. Inside the three of them stood intense silence, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken feelings. Edward's voice broke first, laced with regret. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. "I didn't know. I never even imagined." Clara interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm not here to punish you, Edward. I'm here because our children deserve better. They deserve to know their father, and you deserve the chance to be in their lives if you're willing." Her words carried both forgiveness and challenge. This moment wasn't about Edward's ego or reputation. It was about the children who had unknowingly been caught in the aftermath of his choices. Veronica could no longer hold back. Her emotions interrupted. "This is beyond belief. Do you honestly think I'll just stand here and accept this? Edward, you've humiliated me in front of everyone I care about. How could you hide something so huge from me?" Her voice wavered and tears began to fill her eyes. "What kind of man am I even?" Marrying Edward, visibly shaken, turned toward her, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't know," he said earnestly. "I swear I didn't know if I had." He faltered, unable to finish the truth. He had no idea what he might have done. The weight of his choices pressing down on him was almost unbearable in the hall. The triplets sat quietly, their young faces puzzled as they tried to make sense of the chaos around them. Guests whispered in hushed tones, speculation spreading through the room as the once festive atmosphere gave way to unease. Clara eventually returned to her children, her expression steady but determined. She knelt beside them, gently pulling them close. "Everything will be fine," she assured them softly, though the path ahead was anything but clear. Meanwhile, while Edward was left alone with Veronica, he realized he was at a crossroads. His carefully maintained world was unraveling, and the truth he had avoided for so long could no longer be buried. He now faced a critical choice: rise to the occasion and take accountability, or allow his fear and pride to dictate his next steps. The wedding day had descended in a turmoil, and it was clear that life as they knew it would never be the same long after the guests began to leave, their whispers of scandal lingering in the air. The echoes of the confrontation continued to haunt the grand estate. Edward Langston stood on the edge of a decision that would define the man he was, and the legacy he would leave behind as the sun sank below the horizon, casting shadows across the estate's sprawling grounds. Edward lingered alone in the silent banquet hall, grappling with the enormity of his choices. The glittering chandeliers above seemed to mock him with their brilliance, a sharp contrast to the turmoil rowing within Veronica. St. James had stormed out her hopes for a perfect wedding in ruins. Her parting words, searing with anger and betrayal, echoed in Edward's mind. "You've destroyed everything. This is the man I trusted with my future, a man with secrets even he didn't know." Though Edward had begged her to stay, to let him fix the damage, her humiliation and fury had left no room for reconciliation as her limousine disappeared into the night. Edward knew their relationship was over. His meticulously curated life was falling apart, and for the first time, he faced the emptiness of his carefully crafted success. Elsewhere, on the estate, Clara Matthews sat quietly with the triplets waiting to see what Edward would do next. Though outwardly calm, Clara felt the weight of the day bearing down on her. She had achieved what she came for, revealing the truth and giving Edward a chance to step into his role as a father. Yet as the hours passed, and Edward remained hidden in his solitude, doubts crept in. Had she been wrong to confront him so publicly? Would Edward ever find the courage to set aside his ego and embrace the responsibilities he had long evaded? Edward's world turned upside down in the hours that followed. Clara's words echoed relentlessly in his mind, each one a fresh wound. They deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them. Images of the triplets, bright-eyed, curious, and unmistakably his, haunted him. The reality of their existence and how much he had already missed hit like a tidal wave. Their first steps, first words, countless milestones gone all. While he was preoccupied with his pursuit of wealth and status, Edward, once proud of his success, now felt poorer than ever. Despite everything he had gained, he realized he lacked what truly mattered. The weight of regret was unbearable, and for the first time, Edward confronted the emptiness in his life. He had always defined himself by his accomplishments, letting money and prestige measure his worth. But now, standing on the precipice of his own choices, he understood that continuing down this road meant losing something far more precious than any trophy, the chance to be a father. Resolute, Edward knew it was time to act. He found Clara and the children in the garden, where the triplets played under the warm glow of evening lights. James was helping Amelia climb a bench, and Theo's laughter filled the air as he chased a butterfly. Edward stood silently observing the scene, so full of life, so untouched by the complications swirling around them. It was a poignant reminder of what he had missed, and the possibility of what he could have. Clara noticed him and rose to meet him, her face a mix of caution and curiosity. Though she had anticipated this moment, it still unsettled her. Edward approached, his usual bravado replaced with rare vulnerability. His voice wavered as he began, "I've spent my whole life chasing the wrong things. I thought success would make me happy, but now I see how much I've lost in the process." Clara remained quiet, her gaze steady as Edward continued, "I can't undo the past, but I want to try. I want to be there for James, Amelia, and Theo. If you'll let me, I want to be the father they deserve." Edward's sincerity was evident, but his words were heavy with uncertainty. He was a man stepping into unfamiliar territory. Unsure of the reception he would face, Clara finally replied, her tone soft but firm. "Being a father isn't about grand gestures or empty words. It's about showing up day in and day out. It's about scraped knees, bedtime stories, and being present. You can't buy their trust, Edward. You have to earn it." Her words challenged him, but Edward accepted them as truth. Over the following weeks, he set out to prove himself. He delegated work, stepping back from his company to focus on his children. It was a slow-use process. The triplets, initially hesitant, tested him, but Edward persevered, showing up to school events, helping with homework, and learning the small, significant details of their lives little by little. Their walls began to crumble from a distance. Clara observed his efforts. Her skepticism softened as she saw a side of Edward she hadn't seen in years, the kind-hearted, devoted man she once knew. Though their romantic chapter was over, she respected the father he was becoming. For the first time, she dared to believe he could change. As the years passed, Edward's priorities shifted dramatically. His connection with James, Amelia, and Theo deepened, bringing him a fulfillment. No accolade ever could. The man who once sought validation through his achievements now found it in the love and laughter of his family. His life, redefined by purpose and connection, became richer than he had ever imagined. Looking back, Edward saw the pivotal moment that reshaped his world. What had begun as a showcase of his success became the catalyst for his transformation. Surrounded by his children and at a family gathering, years later, Edward realized he had finally achieved true wealth, not measured in assets or titles, but in the bonds that truly mattered.